You're not going to believe this, but I found a version of Avatar that's worse than M. Night Shyamalan's. It's called Don Decker, The Last Waterbender. Now, if you're in the mood for a little bit of brain rot and you want to watch it for yourself, just search Rainboy, Unsolved Mysteries, Season 5, Episode 18. This shitload of actually tried to convince people that some guy from Pennsylvania got possessed by a demon for a few days and quickly started learning how to bend all the elements. Apparently, he was able to levitate, move objects with his mind, and make it rain on command. Amazing. Don Decker the Avatar didn't even need to do a training montage to master his new abilities. It was instantaneous. He truly was the chosen one. Now, in the last couple of years, I've seen a lot of YouTubers cover this story, and the common consensus among them is that this is one of the most compelling claims of the paranormal ever recorded, which is a strange choice of words since there isn't even a single photograph of this case. So today's video is probably going to be mostly B-roll. However, just trust me bro, because the Rainboy story was witnessed by many credible and trustworthy people. And these people were police officers, jail guards, a jail warden, a reverend, a landlord, his wife, and a lady who owned a pizzeria. None of whom, by the way, seemed to own a fucking camera. But just trust me bro, this really happened, and there's still no explanation for it. Nobody in the entire world can explain how Don Decker the Avatar was able to make rain appear on command inside his friend's home and inside his jail cell. Wow, that's really weird. I must have a similar power to Don Decker then, because I somehow just made this article by Skeptic magazine appear. I mean, all I did was Google Don Decker explanation, and there it was. And it has been there since 2013. 2013 was a long time ago, so there's been more than enough time for all of these dogshit YouTube channels to find this article, read it, and share the explanation. But instead, we ignore all the facts, we manipulate the narrative, and we spread bullshit. YouTubers, the last turd benders. Now, since I called out all of these idiots, I'm kinda expecting to get a lot of hate in the comments for this video. But that's okay.
Being hated by losers is the price I pay for not being one of them.
That line was so fucking good that I'm gonna give Pepsi Full the Mystorian's official pap of approval. Sir Pepsi Full. What the fuck was I talking about again? Ah, Rainboy. Sorry, I have a bad habit of faffing around. Now, the Skeptic magazine article that I'm going to be referring to was written by Robert Bartholomew and the king of the skeptics himself, the modern day Sherlock Holmes, and my hero, Joe.
Say his name and he appears.
Joe Nickell. Not Joe Hendry, Joe Nickell. If you need a reminder of who Joe Nickell was, he's the guy that made Ed Warren look like a proper on live TV, and he also debunked the Bell witch haunting, amongst many, many other things as well, of course. I believe in Sir Dr. Joe Nickell. But anyway, enough faffing about. Let's begin. On the 24th of February 1983, 20-year-old Don Decker of Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. Nah, cut the music. Something's missing. Let's try use the goofy-ass Unsolved Mysteries background music for this intro. On the 24th of February 1983, 20-year-old Don Decker of Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania was on a furlough from the Monroe County Correctional Facility to attend the funeral of his grandfather, 63-year-old James Kishpa. Just by the way, Don Decker the Avatar was serving a 4 to 12-month prison sentence for receiving stolen property. But I'm sure that's nothing to worry about. I'm sure that he's totally trustworthy. Anyway, while at the funeral, Don became quite upset at the fact that his parents were glorifying his grandfather and that there were so many people who were sad about his death. The quote-unquote outpouring of sympathy for his grandfather apparently fucked him off so much that he somehow became possessed by a water demon. Now, I've been trying to figure out if anything happened at the funeral. The answer is no. Now, according to Don Decker, he hated his grandfather because he had physically abused him since he was 7 years old. On Unsolved Mysteries, Don said, quote, "No other part of the family knew anything about what happened. It was like good, fighting evil. The evil was gone, and I was hoping, that everything would change. Well, fair enough. After the funeral, Don didn't immediately go back to jail. He didn't pass go, he didn't collect $200, but he did, however, collect a demon. Then, on the evening of February 26th, Don was staying with Bob and Jeannie Kefir, a couple of family friends that lived at 528 Ann Street. Now, according to Skeptic magazine, Don said that he was in the upstairs bathroom washing before dinner when he started to feel strange and confused. He then fell to the floor and had a vision of an old man wearing a crown, staring at him in a window. How frightening! He then noticed 3 deep scratches running down his right wrist. Well, isn't he just fucking lucky that they weren't deep enough to take him immediately to his own funeral? Do not pass go, do not collect $200, go straight to the fucking morgue. But hey, luckily the paranormal doesn't work that way. Anyway, Don then got up off the floor, washed off the blood, and then just went downstairs to have dinner with Bob and Jeannie. So the thought never even crossed his mind that this might have been some kind of medical emergency. Isn't this something that you would mention to people? He just collapsed on the bathroom floor and hallucinated. Well, what the fuck do I know? Anyway, Don seems to have done a pretty shit job at cleaning up the blood, because Bob immediately noticed it. And then, Don Decker went full 50 Shades of Cray. Crayon chewing fucking crazy. And he said that Satan had scratched him. Isn't he fucking lucky that Satan didn't obliterate him?
Hey, ass butt. Ass butt? He'll be back and upset, but you got your 5 minutes.
Castiel, did you just Molotov my brother with holy fire?
No.
No one dicks with Michael but me.
Moses! I'm not sure if that's safe for YouTube. Anyway, pretty soon after Don went crazy, Bob and Jeannie noticed that water had begun to drip from the walls and the ceiling. Apparently then, at the same time, they all heard a loud noise coming from above. If I'm not mistaken, they described the sound kinda like a crashing sound. At this point now, terrified for their lives, Bob did the only rational thing you would do in this situation. Bob called his landlord, Ron Van Wy. Ron Van Wy answered the phone and said, "Van, why in the blue hell are you calling me, Bob?" Bob said, "Well, funny you should use that expression, because Satan's here and he's making it rain inside the house." Ron then said, "Jesus Christ!" And Bob said, "No, Satan." I'm not really sure if that's the actual conversation. The article just said that Bob called Ron. But I imagine that's how the conversation went. Then for some reason, when Ron got there, him and Bob went upstairs to confront Satan. Ron was gonna say, "Do you have any fucking idea how expensive these carpets are?" But shockingly, Satan wasn't there. So the only plausible explanation that they could think of now was demonic leaky pipes. But they just couldn't find any of those either. Apparently, Bob said, quote, "We thought there had to be some kind of leak, but there's no water in that end of the house where it was raining. There's no water lines in any place but the kitchen and the bathroom, which were in the back of the house. Therefore, it was Satan." So anyway, after failing to find leaky pipes, Bob and Ron went back downstairs and said that they were startled to find Don there in a trance. Believing now at this point that the house was possessed by an evil force, Bob did the only rational thing you would do in this situation, and he called the police. Ron just called his wife Romaine. Well, good. We need all the reinforcements that we can get. But let's not call a priest, or a scientist, or a fucking doctor, because that would just make too much sense. So pretty soon after this call, Officer John Bojan arrived at the house. He went inside the house and he claims that not only was there rain, but that the droplets would come from the floor, defying gravity. Now, according to Unsolved Mysteries, it looks like John Bojan arrived first, saw all of this bullshit, then went back outside and sat on the hood of his car, waiting for patrolman Richard Walbert to arrive. When Richard Walbert arrived, John Bojan told him, quote, "I just want you to walk into the house." Walbert then says, "I'm not walking into the house unless you can explain to me what I'm walking into." John Bojan then says, trust me, just walk into the house." Can I just ask quickly, what is so hard about saying that there's water coming from the ceiling and the walls in this house? I was just taking the piss earlier with the Satan conversation between Ron and Bob, but when Bob phoned Ron, he also said that he cannot explain what's going on, and Ron just had to come over and see it. So I don't understand. What is so difficult about explaining that there's water coming from the ceiling and the walls? If that was so hard to explain, what else did they fail to explain properly here? Probably all of it. Anyways, Richard Walbert said, quote, "I walked in the door and John Bojan came right in behind me. I couldn't get 2 steps inside the door and I was absolutely pelted." Now, Richard Walbert said that not only was it raining inside, but that the water droplets defied physics. Do you people even have an understanding of physics? You couldn't even explain that there's water coming from the ceiling. Yet now you somehow have an understanding of physics and gravity. Richard Walbert said, quote, "We were just standing inside the front door and met this droplet of water traveling horizontally. It passed between us and just traveled out into the next room." Sure, why not? John Bojan said, quote, "I literally had a chill go up my spine, made the hair stand up on your neck. That's how I felt. This was a situation where things were happening that I never ever dreamed could possibly happen, and there was no way of explaining what was going on." Yes, okay, we get it. It's unexplainable. To you. So eventually, Bojan and Walbert left the house to go and report to the police chief that they had just witnessed a supernatural event. Meanwhile, Bob, Jeannie, Ron, and Romaine confronted Don and accused him of causing the rain. How the fuck does that make any sense? They called the police said they saw water flying sideways, and now everyone thinks that Don was playing a prank or some shit. I'm sorry, I don't understand what's going on here. But according to Unsolved Mysteries, it's around about this time that Bob, Jeannie, and Don decided to go across the street to get something to eat. Ron, Van Wy, and Romaine remained at the house. The Van Wys said, quote, "They left and everything else left too. The rain stopped. The house was normal. We were kind of thinking that maybe it was coming from them, and we weren't sure at the time which one." I'm sorry, what the fuck is happening? Let's just remind ourselves again of what was just witnessed. All of these people just saw water flying sideways, defying gravity and physics, and the only explanation was that there was no explanation. The reason you people called the fucking police was because you people believed that the house was possessed by an evil force. So now how can you say that you think that this was coming from Bob, Jeannie, or Don? There is only 2 ways, in my opinion, that this could possibly make sense. Either these people are fucking stupid, or they're lying and the story has been greatly exaggerated. Anyways, moving on. According to Unsolved Mysteries again, a lady named Pam Scrofano, who owned a pizzeria across the road from the Kefir's house, said she had visited them earlier that day and had seen the rain firsthand. Nani? Wait, hold the fuck on. I've been reading this shit chronologically and I've added everything. When the fuck did she come over and see the rain? Also, I thought this started at dinner time. How the fuck was it raining earlier in the day now? And also, are they going for pizza now after dinner? Did they not eat their dinner? If not, why not microwave that shit then? Why are you wasting food? Moses! This story is actually just pissing in our faces right now and calling it rain. What a shitload of fuck. Anyway, Pam Scrofano was convinced that Don was possessed by an evil spirit. She said, quote, "You looked at Donnie and he was like in a trance. He would look at you, but not knowing you were there. I said to Jeannie, he's got to be possessed. We're sitting there and a couple of seconds later, there's water all over the pizzeria too. I've never seen anything like that happen. I went to the cash register, I had a crucifix there, I took it out and I put it on him. And the minute I put it on him and it touched his skin, he got burned."
I freaked out. A friend got burned.
There's no way that anybody could have played a joke like that. This was real. Donnie was doing it himself. He was doing it without realizing he was doing it. Listen, I just want to say that I'm quite suspicious of the fact that this woman calls this guy Donnie. I don't know, but it just kind of makes it feel like they were familiar with one another, you know? Apparently after Don flooded the pizzeria, he didn't offer to help clean it up. They just all went back to Bob and Jeannie's house. And again, Bob, Jeannie, Ron and Romaine all gave Don shit and accused him of causing the rain. Despite the fact that they all said they saw a water droplet float sideways and defy physics, and claim that they all saw Don get burnt by a fucking crucifix when he flooded the pizzeria. Can you please just make up your mind and stick to a story? Apparently then, after confronting Don, the pots and pans hanging in the kitchen began to clang, and Don Decker the Avatar unlocked airbending. He then began to levitate and was flung against a wall. Unfortunately, it seems he was still working on his airbending skills, and he fucked it up. Don then looked up at everybody and said that he felt a pain in his arm and saw deep bloody scratches running the length of his forearm that formed the shape of a king's cross near the joint of his inner elbow. So now at this point, I'm wondering, how many crucifix-shaped injuries does he have? Is it 1 or is it 2? And did he go to the hospital to have these checked out? No. But why? Well, probably because then there would be some kind of proof that the story actually happened. And also because fuck you, that's why. But finally, after seeing Don jump into a wall, Bob, Jeannie, Ron and Romaine were convinced that Don had become possessed by Satan. Well, it's about time. Then, a little bit later, Officer Bojan returned and claims that Don had unlocked yet another ability, electricity bending. Because when he came back to the house, he found an electric atmosphere with Jeannie in the living room, reading the 23rd Psalm of the Bible in an effort to exorcise Don Decker. Bojan said that he too now believed that Don Decker was possessed by Satan. Adding to the eerie atmosphere though, the mysterious rain remained confined only to the living room. Sometime around here, Bob Kefir also said that he touched the water, and he said that it felt sticky. Like spooky ectoplasm perhaps. Well, it seems that Bojan then left the house again, and you would assume that any rational person would go and fetch a camera. But no. Bojan just came back with Patrolman Richard Walbert and the Stroudsburg Police Chief Gary Roberts. Now Chief Roberts was so disappointed with this apparent demonic possession that he ordered his officers to leave the house and not file a report. Now, if we are to believe Unsolved Mysteries, these people saw rain flying sideways, they saw a crucifix burning this man, and they saw him levitate. So we have to ask, why didn't the chief see it? Was it maybe because Chief Roberts was the only person in the story who wasn't completely full of shit? Probably. But I also just want to point out that he is also guilty of not bringing a camera to this event. Now, despite being told not to waste their time at this house, the next day, a couple of other police officers went to go see this shit for themselves. Police officers William Davies and John Rundle went to the Kefir home against the chief's wishes and claimed to observe Don Decker's body being flung through the air. William Davies said that when he handed Don a gold cross, Don dropped it, complaining that it burned his skin. Amazing! Another burn in the shape of a cross. But did anybody at this point decide that it was time to call a doctor or take Don to the hospital? No, of course not. But somehow, it gets worse, because John Rundle said that all of a sudden, Don lifted up off the ground and flew across the room with a force as though a bus had hit him. When they checked him, there were 3 claw marks on the side of his neck, which drew blood. Moses! Did Don finally go to the hospital after this? No, he went back to jail. So how much of an exaggeration is this? Because usually when people get hit by buses, they die. So honestly, this story is just becoming frustrating at this point. I mean, what the fuck would you do if you saw this in real life? This guy has apparently gone into a trance multiple times, been scratched multiple times, and flung against the wall multiple times. But nobody even once considered calling a doctor or the hospital. But anyway, back to jail he went. Now, while back in his cell, it began raining again. Apparently, his cellmate panicked and was then moved to a separate cell. 2 prison guards then came over and said, "Hey, why don't you use those powers of yours to make our shift supervisor wet?" Don said, well, that's really immature, but he did it anyway. Just a little bit later then, at about 8 p.m. in the evening, shift supervisor Dave Keenhold, who was in his office in a distant part of the jail, claimed that he was struck in the chest by a drop of water. Now that wouldn't be enough to convince even the most gullible of people, like not even a flat earther. However, that drop of water was enough to convince this tough prison guard motherfucker Dave Keenhold that Don Decker was indeed the Avatar. So he then summoned the jail's chaplain, Reverend William Blackburn. Oh, hold on. Dave Keenhold had his own powers. He could summon reverends, like a necromancer. A revromancer. No, he just phoned him and said, please come perform an exorcism. William Blackburn then made his way over to the prison and apparently performed a quick exorcism. And he claims that while doing so, it started raining again. However, he knew this rain was demonic because the rain did not wet the Bible. Forgive me for being suspicious, but my question is, did the rain even touch the Bible? Was it even raining? For some reason, I don't fucking believe this guy. But he did an exorcism, and sadly there was no projectile vomiting, no 360-degree head spins, and no your mother sucks in hell. But afterwards, Don felt great. He said he was cleansed and he felt a great sense of relief. Good for him. After that, it never rained again. So that's pretty much the story. What a load of fucking donkey dookie. Now, before we get into Joe Nickell's thoughts, I want to remind you that despite there being multiple opportunities to capture this evidence, there is not one single photo of this case. There is no video of this case. There isn't even as much as a fucking crayon drawing of this case.
If we can get a picture of Julia Roberts in a thong, we can certainly get a picture of this weirdo.
And there seems to be a shitload of exaggeration here as well. Now, personally, I do not believe in this paranormal shit even a little. However, I cannot for the life of me understand why people who do, or pretend to at least, just insist on exaggerating or embellishing these stories. These people apparently want us to take the paranormal seriously, but at the same time, they just cannot stop themselves from bending the truth. Paranormal activists, the lost truth benders. Moving on now to Robert Bartholomew and Joe Nickell's thoughts. Quote, at the time of the events, Don Decker was under extreme stress. He was serving jail time and he was experiencing the death of a relative whom he loathed. While so-called trance states may be triggered by stress and do not necessarily denote mental illness or disorder, they are also easily faked. It is remarkable that Decker did not receive medical attention. Instead, attempts were made to exorcise him. The witnesses' actions are also inconsistent with the nature of the claims. Just imagine, you are in a house where supernatural events are supposedly occurring, and indoor rain is moving upward from the floor, and a man supposedly levitates and can move objects with his mind. If documented, it is a monumental event in the history of science, for it would defy the laws of physics as we know them and demonstrate the existence of paranormal activity. It was also an event spanning several days and supported by numerous witnesses. Why didn't anyone bother to record these happenings with a video camera or take photos? Don Decker's forearm supposedly had deep scratches and the bloody image of a king's cross. So why didn't anybody photograph the scratches and the image? These inactions are more consistent with events that became exaggerated over time. Furthermore, on Officer Bojan's first visit, he reported that a drop of water materialized out of thin air and then flew horizontally through the room. So what does he do soon after witnessing this amazing event? He and his partner leave. Now surely, they had some access to video equipment or a camera that could have documented this remarkable occurrence. Why not phone the local TV station to record this event? All we are left with are eyewitness accounts from excited observers who have a worldview that includes the reality of the devil. End quote. Now even worse, Officer Bojan returns later with the police chief, still without a fucking camera. Now Nickell and Bartholomew actually give the story the benefit of the doubt and basically said that if this did indeed happen, as these people say it did. Human perception and eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, even under ideal conditions. And at the end of the day, police officers are just human beings. It's a very strange situation, and these cops are supposedly walking into a house where some dude has become possessed by Satan. It's quite possible that that influenced their experience in that house. Now, as for Bob and Ron searching the house for leaky pipes, they failed to check the most likely cause of the leak, the roof. When a reporter asked why Ron Van Wy didn't check the roof, he apparently said something to the effect of, it hadn't rained outside from the sky for several days. Well, here is Joe Nickell's theory. Assuming that something happened that calls for a natural explanation, according to a report on moisture problems in manufactured homes, published by the Manufactured Housing Research Alliance, Pennsylvania is at moderate to high risk for winter moisture problems, with one of the most severe events being ice damming. This is caused by warm air entering an attic that melts snow on the outer surface of a roof, resulting in an accumulation of ice under which pools of water form and eventually leak. Ice dams are common after major snowstorms in areas where the temperatures rise above freezing during the day and fall below 32 degrees Fahrenheit at night. Such conditions were applicable in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. According to the weather records for the nearby town of Scranton, just 13 days before the strange indoor rain began, there was a record snowfall across central and eastern Pennsylvania, which is exactly where Stroudsburg can be found. And by Jove, he's done it again. This is why I believe in Sir Dr. Joe Nickell. But of course, there are some other points that we still need to debunk. Now, one of these points, verified by Officer Bojan, is that the rain was only confined to one room. It was only raining in the living room. Well, according to Patrick Uhlman, a specialist in environmental design and ice damming from the University of Minnesota, he said that it is actually common for ice damming events to be limited to a small portion of the house, such as a single room. Another point is that Bob Kefir said that the rain dripping down the walls had a strange consistency. Bob said that it wasn't water as you know water, it was a sticky, tacky feeling. Well, Bob, that's because it was spooky ectoplasm. No, Uhlman says that water running down ceilings and walls often mixes with the resins in the wood or the residue from plaster, and that is what gives the water a tacky feel. Another point of concern and a point in favor of ice damming is the noise that was heard upstairs just before it started raining for the first time. This is once again common for ice damming, because as water expands while it's freezing, it commonly pops or cracks and then usually falls off the roof and releases the water. If it also did rain in the pizzeria, it is possible again that it is ice damming. So in my mind at least, that explains the rain. But what about the other supernatural powers that Don supposedly had? Well, if you recall, the day after the police were called, officers William Davies and John Rundle went to the home to see what the fuck was going on here. Now before this, Don had supposedly exhibited a variety of supernatural abilities, and the explicit purpose of Davies and Rundle's visit on this day was to verify those claims. The fact alone that they didn't bring any cameras at all is a massive red flag. Now during this visit, Davies apparently gave Don a gold cross to hold, and then Don complained that it was burning his skin and then he dropped it to the floor. Davies claims that when he picked the gold cross up, the gold cross was in fact hot. However, he did clarify that it wasn't hot, but it was just hot. So, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? Here's a fun fact. Did you know that there is a metal that you can literally melt by just using the natural heat of your hand? That metal is called gallium. Its melting point is so low that body temperature can melt it. So what exactly does that mean? Well, what it means is that if you put anything in your hands, you'd warm it up slightly. Unless it was something hotter than your hand's natural body temperature, of course. So how hot exactly was the gold cross? We will never know. The next thing to figure out is what exactly threw Don into the wall with such a force that it looked like a bus hit him. Well, it was probably him. Joe Nickell speculates that it is almost certain that Don just flung himself into the wall, and this is yet another claim that has just been exaggerated over the years. So there we go. That explains the house about the best we can. As for the pots and pans clanging and the water flying sideways, honestly, I don't fucking care. If all of these people who are claiming this happened couldn't even be bothered to take a single fucking photo of anything, then why should we believe them? They had countless opportunities to capture evidence, but instead, they just did nothing. That said though, the jail is where things get a little more interesting. Nah, I'm kidding, it just gets a little more hilarious. Now when Don returned to jail, the rain supposedly followed him. Yet before arriving, word had spread about his rain-making ability, and many guards and inmates were expecting some type of rain event. According to Don Decker the Avatar, all the inmates heard what was going on at the house. They were all scared. The guards, they were scared too. Jail supervisor guy Dave Keenhold told the TV show Paranormal Witness, quote, "After looking at Decker's demeanor, we felt that the supernatural was present. Water was all over his cell. Water was going horizontal, was going vertical, was climbing up the walls, and defying the laws of gravity." Amazing. Did they capture any of this on CCTV? No. Did they call in physicists? No. Did jail supervisor guy Dave Keenhold even see this for himself? No. So what the fuck is this guy even talking about then? This guy, Dave Keenhold, told reporter Christian Tatu that he never even visited Don Decker in his cell.
You serious?
Now Joe Nickell says, how can Dave Keenhold appear so certain of this event if he is relying on second-hand accounts? At the very least, Paranormal Witness is guilty of giving the impression that Keenhold actually was there. And you know, honestly, why the fuck would Paranormal Witness even care about being guilty of that? Like I said earlier, all these people want us to take the paranormal seriously, but just cannot stop themselves from bending the truth. Paranormal Witness, the lost truth bender. Joe Nickell and Robert Bartholomew go on to say, quote, "What other selective use of evidence was employed? The documentary only gives one side of the story. There are no interviews with skeptics, and conspicuously absent is the testimony of then police chief Gary Roberts. Is the purpose of the show to uncover the truth, or create the impression of a mystery when one does not exist in order to obtain high ratings?" And by Jove, he's done it again. That is a very good point. If this evidence was so clear and convincing, why did nobody record a video or take a photograph? And where are all the other witnesses? There are only 9 people. Surely, if you saw this shit for yourself, water flying sideways and defying the laws of gravity, wouldn't you call everybody you knew to come and take a look at this? Your friends, your family, your neighbors, the fucking pizza boy across the road to come and take a look at water flying sideways? Why not call the FBI or university experts in physics to investigate this? Well, here's why. Because that would make just a little too much sense. So anyway, to explain the water in Don's cell that we never saw for ourselves, it could have just come from the sink or from the toilet or even come from the roof just like Bob and Jeannie's house. But we'll never know because these people just didn't take any photos. Now, this final part is the ultimate brain bender. If you recall, the prison guards asked Don to make Dave Keenhold wet, and so Don did. Now, in this stupid Paranormal Witness documentary, Keenhold is seen sitting in his office, very far away from Don Decker, when all of a sudden, a drop of water hits him in the sternum. Dave Keenhold goes on to say, quote, "I was just saturated with water." However, in 1993, Keenhold told Unsolved Mysteries that he didn't even fucking know a drop of water hit him until a prison guard came into his office and pointed it out to him. Apparently, one of the guards walked into Dave's office and told him that the wet spot in his chest comes from Don Decker, because Don said that he would make it rain on Dave. Well, firstly, one drop of water is not rain. Secondly, that wet patch could have been caused by anything. Probably saliva coming out of this drooling idiot's mouth. But Joe Nickell thinks that it could have been sweat, or even that he spilled something on himself or messed food on his shirt. And that's a pretty good theory, because in an interview, Dave Keenhold said that he had just had his evening meal before this guard rushed in and pointed out the wet spot. That's probably the best theory, but I like mine better. I think it was drool. And yes, I know I'm being a dick to this guy, but how the fuck can you say the water was defying gravity in his cell? He was possessed by the devil, but I didn't see it though. I wasn't there. Anyway, only after this guard came in and pointed out the drool in his chest did Dave finally connect the dots and deduce that Don Decker was possessed by Satan. Then, a good couple of years later in 2012, reporter Christina Tattoo, and yeah, I realize I fucked up her name earlier and I called her Christian. Sorry, my bad. But Christina Tattoo asked both Keenhold and Ron Van Wy why they didn't take any photos. Fucking Dave Keenhold said that back then, most people used Polaroids, which would have been too slow to capture the events. How convenient! Ron Van Wy said something a little bit different. He said that people back then didn't just carry around cameras. Bullshit. Pocket cameras were inexpensive and plentiful at the time. The 1983 Montgomery Ward catalog, for example, lists pocket cameras for as little as $17.95. There is no reason why a Polaroid would have been too slow to capture the alleged events. Nickell and Bartholomew go on to say, quote, "If these key witnesses fail to recall that cameras were plentiful at the time, and clearly they did, what else did they get wrong as well?" Another example of how events likely became exaggerated over time are claims about the mysterious rain pouring down inside the Kefir house during the police visits. It could not have been too perceptible, as at one point, the police placed a bag over Don Decker's head to eliminate the possibility of his causing the rain by spitting. Yet, in both the Paranormal Witness and Unsolved Mystery versions of the events, those inside the house are drenched by heavy rain. Moses. What a stupid story. Here is Joe Nickell's conclusion. The most plausible explanation is that Don Decker feigned a trance while those around him, all of whom held deep religious beliefs, interpreted natural events within a Christian frame of reference. Where most residents would phone a building contractor at the first sign of a leaky ceiling, the Kefirs rang the police. Where most people would have sought medical aid for someone who was in a supposed trance, neither the police nor the Kefirs did so. Where most corrections supervisors who saw a prisoner with a strange look would have thought little of it, Dave Keenhold assumed that Don Decker was possessed by a demonic presence. Now, deception is also a distinct possibility here. Don Decker could have augmented an existing phenomenon with tricks. As for Don's purported levitation, it's worth noting a recurrent pattern in poltergeist cases. The central figure, like Don in this case, or like Janet Hodgson's in the Enfield case, or like Betsy Bell in the Bell Witch haunting, the central figure is often caught throwing objects or engaging in other trickery to convince those present of his or her powers. In the case of the Rain Man of Pennsylvania, the one person here who supposedly can make objects move and who levitates also has a criminal record. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Don Decker the Avatar has already demonstrated his waterbending and his airbending abilities. Not so sure about the earthbending. Maybe he did that too. It's not impossible. I mean, he is Don Decker, the fucking Avatar. But in 2012, Don Decker would unlock firebending and got arrested again for trying to burn a fucking restaurant down.
NANI?! お前はもう死んでいる。
So anyway, that's the story of Rainboy. What a shitload of fuck.